first two chapters of the Gospel of Matthew, as well as the first two chapters of the Gospel of Luke, tell the story of the birth of the Messiah and its meaning. And the language of those chapters is drenched with the language of the Old Testament. Almost every word and phrase is paralleled by the language in Jesus' Bible. Remember, Jesus didn't have a New Testament. He had the Hebrew Scripture, what we call the Old Testament. So in a way, these chapters serve as a transition from the older to the newer. And each one of the words is loaded with meaning and purpose and direction. What's in a word? There's all kinds of words, and sometimes we understand them, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we may understand the background of Bethlehem, or Nazareth, or gold and frankincense, and understand that they have Old Testament resonances and echoes. There's a lot in a word. Sometimes we understand what a word means, and sometimes we don't. I heard recently about a person in California, of course it was in California, who sued the Dr. Pepper Company because she had drank a lot of Diet Dr. Pepper and didn't lose any weight. So her understanding of what the word diet was different from what the company understood as the word diet. They threw the case out. She did not win that case, by the way. But so much of the language that we see in the Scripture has resonances and deeper meanings and particular meanings that are not always found if we just read it on the surface. Back when I was a teacher, I used to tell my students that it's important to read and understand the Old Testament, even if you believe yourself to be a New Testament Christian, which I think we are. If we're Christians of both books, but some people thought they were just New Testament Christians because the Old Testament is a dictionary for the New Testament. So much of this language carries echoes of the purposes that are ahead of Jesus in his life. This is written to help us realize that Jesus' birth, life, death, and resurrection were for the purpose, as we read in Matthew chapter 3, to fulfill all righteousness. To fulfill all righteousness. Now what does that mean? When we think of righteousness, there's another word. We think of being obedient or being morally upright. But when Matthew speaks of God's righteousness, he means something else entirely different. God's righteousness is God's grand cosmic plan and purpose that is unfolding in history. God's righteousness is the destiny of which Jesus is a part and of which we are a part as well. And in the fulfilling of our purpose, we fulfill God's righteousness, God's plan. Now, how do we fulfill God's purpose? I used to do some work with developing leadership among pastors and laity, and I would say it's a process, and every decision, every action takes you either closer to your goal or away from your goal. There's no neutral actions. Every action takes you either closer to your goal or further away from your goal. That's a kind of a heavy burden. The visit of the Magi symbolizes the fulfillment of God's plan to reach out to the entire world. we call the season Epiphany. It actually starts, there really are 12 days to Christmas. Today is the last day of the season of Christmas. Tomorrow is the first day of Epiphany. The word Epiphany means to reveal. To reveal. It's not just that Jesus is born, but post Jesus' birth, there is revelation of what Jesus' life means. And the fulfilling of the visit of the Magi, of the wise ones, the wise men, is a symbol of Jesus' openness and availability to all people. They came from the east. They came from Persia. They came from modern-day Iran. A name we hear a lot these days. They came from modern-day Iran. And they came as either astronomers or astrologers, people who shared in the secular wisdom of the world. The difference in an astronomer is an astronomer might write material today in the Farmer's Almanac, predicting the weather, predicting the seasons, predicting the shaping of the stars. An astrologer would be found on the comics page under the horoscope. That's the difference between an astronomer and an astrologer. We don't know which they were. But they obviously saw a star, and it brought them first to Jerusalem, where they went. And what did they ask Herod, the one who was known as the King of the Jews? Where will we find the one, King Herod, who is born the King of the Jews? Well, that's kind of a troubling thing to do. That'd be just a little bit like going to Tom Brady and saying, who do you think's going to be the Patriots quarterback next year? So they went to Herod. He said, once you find them, come back and let us know so we can also go and pay homage. 3 times the word pay homage against these letters, these words are used in our passage. The importance of going and worshiping at the foot of Jesus is emphasized again and again. They went to King Herod, then they went to the chief priests and the religious scribes, and they sent them down this dusty road, this dirt road, not 6 miles outside of the great city of Jerusalem, to this little town of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. And there they offered the gifts which were prescribed and predicted in the Old Testament. In Isaiah chapter 60, they offered gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I think here we learn that small acts of worship are part of a larger plan and purpose that we can never understand. Small acts of worship. That's really what this was. It was an act of worship. God's plan includes these small acts of worship. When we gather on a Sunday morning, it is not a matter of indifference to God's purpose and plan. We do so in order to fulfill all righteousness, to be a part of God's purpose and plan. When we gather up our small gifts, it's not a matter of indifference to God and God's plan. Our small gifts that we've gathered throughout the year have suddenly become $6,000 to provide water to those in grinding poverty in Haiti. Small acts of worship are part of a larger plan and purpose we can never fully know. That's point 1. That's a 3-point sermon. Just like in the old days, 3-point sermons. God's plan includes unlikely and unwitting partners. That's point number 2. God's plan includes unlikely and unwitting partners. Surely if we thought that there would be a partner in the ministry of Jesus, it would be the chief priests and the scribes there, the religious leaders leaders of Jerusalem, they knew the scripture. They knew that that just as David, the great King David, was born in Bethlehem, so the next coming of the King David would also be born in Bethlehem. Surely they would have gone and worshipped at the feet of Jesus, except they did not. These magi from a foreign country who did not know the scripture and did not worship in the synagogues, they were the ones who came to Jesus and offered gifts. That's always a reminder to me. It's not necessarily the great church leaders who are included always in God's plan. It's not the great leaders who are making decisions about the future of our denomination or our church. It's the local folk who are neighbors to one another, who care for each other, who are unwitting partners in the work of God. God's plan in order to fulfill all righteousness, that's point number 2. I'm going to repeat it. God's plan includes unlikely and unwitting partners. Point number 3. God's plan is hidden among forgotten friends, children, the poor, and the powerless. God's plan is hidden among forgotten friends, children, the poor, and the powerless. I'm not just saying that because we just had a bunch of our grandchildren come visit. And it reminds us of the potential and the joy and the power of childhood. I'm saying it because it was the Magi who came to the child Jesus and offered their very best. Who was Jesus? He was a refugee. Why was it so important for the Romans to have everyone in Palestine return to their home base, their tribal home, in order to be counted for the census? Why was that so important? It was a way for the Romans to throw their weight around, to remind them of who was in charge, to create a hardship on people, to take them away from their home village of Nazareth in the north, all the way down south to Judah, to Bethlehem, to throw their weight around, to let them know we've got the power and you're just the little people. And so they found themselves far away from their home in Bethlehem, just outside the gates of Jerusalem, not too many miles down the road. And there they found themselves alone, no place to stay. Homeless, would we call them today? And how many homeless do we meet and we see every day? It's an issue in the city of Lubbock where I live. There are estimates of 1,000 or more people living on the streets every night in Lubbock. And what do we do with the children, the poor, and the powerless? Do we really value them as God's creation? Do we create a hierarchy of value within our own communities? Or in our understanding of humanity, do we really believe that the children and the poor and the powerless are truly the children of God? What about today? I read recently that there are 70 million homeless people in the world. 70 million refugees. If we went to Bethlehem and Jerusalem today, we would find that there are many who, like the Son of Man, has nowhere to lay their head. In Israel and Palestine alone, just in the neighborhood of Jerusalem, there are an estimated 24,000 refugees. Many are Palestinians, of whom a very, very large plurality of Palestinians are Christians. And yet they are still treated as second-class citizens in the nation of Israel. This is the story of one of them. Muzian was born in a refugee in Jerusalem 52 years ago. She has been relocated multiple times over the years between different refugee camps, often living in extremely difficult conditions. She has over and over, when she's built herself some kind of life and a home, she is forced to move to another location. And despite losing everything over and over again, Muzian in the Shufat refugee camp, which is just adjacent to Jerusalem, she's able to start a small shop to sell things to other refugees. And she finds a ready clientele among the 24,000 refugees. That's almost the size of Clovis or my hometown, Hobbs. People have nowhere to live. These are the people who share that characteristic of Jesus. Jesus looking for a home, finding a ministry, following the destiny of God, desiring to fulfill all righteousness. And so we learn from the homeless and the refugee and those that are just passing through that they may be also a part of a greater mission. The destiny of God to fulfill all righteousness. The Magi teach us that it's not just the folks that are in the church or in the synagogue that are a part of God's purpose and plan. That to the very ends of the earth, there are the wise ones that are worshiping, building community, and finding life and love wherever they go. And the Magi teach us that in order to fulfill all righteousness, all must be included in the plan. All must be ready to take a part in God's purpose and plan. And we may need to offer not gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We may need to offer meals ready to eat, or a tent, or water, or most importantly, as education and a stable family environment. What can we do as the people of God to fulfill all righteousness and to have a part in God's purpose and plan? We leave with that question and a challenge for the new year. It's a tradition at Trinity United Methodist Church, so we come together to celebrate the Lord's Supper on the first